So I keep up with the news primarily through NPR in the car and the feed Google gives me on my phone, like that. Since I'm not driving around much right now, I'm kind of at the mercy of Google. With the pandemic going on, I found it interesting to see Bill Gates popping up in my feed multiple times. Like, what or who made the billionaire computer nerd an expert on infectious diseases? And why was he trying to advise the public and even the government on COVID-19? Now, it turns out that he's actually learned a lot through the activities of his foundation, but he serves as an example for me today with this question of who is smart. Like, why do we listen to Bill Gates about the novel coronavirus? Or why listen to Ben Affleck or Katy Perry about politics? Why listen to a reality TV star on how to run the most powerful nation on the planet? Who is smart? Who do you listen to in order to build a life? Who do you look to for relation advice? Who do you look to for life planning advice or diet, exercise, and fashion advice? Who is an example for you of what a good life looks like? Or you could think of, like, how does Tulane choose a commencement speaker? Which I don't know if they even have for this year. I don't know what they're doing for commencement, but sorry, CJ. But Jesus says this thing. He says, where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. So who do you trust and who holds sway in your life? We trust people we believe have real insight into how things work, how to fix problems, and overcome challenges. So you think back to the time of Jesus, and why did the original audience, why did they listen to Jesus? I would say they believed he had real insight into how things really work, the rule of God. His vision for human life was compelling. There were also miracles, which were probably kind of exciting. He was lively, he was fresh, he was liberating and challenging at the same time. And he wasn't pedantic, redundant, or dull. Actually, the Message paraphrase has this to say as their response to Jesus' longest sermon. When Jesus concluded his address, the crowd burst into applause. They had never heard teaching like this. It was apparent that he was living everything he was saying, quite a contrast to the religion teachers. This was the best teaching they had ever heard. So was Jesus just like some peace-loving, wild-eyed idealist in the desert? Was he someone to consider nice, but ignore when it comes to solving problems in the real world? To be honest, a lot of Christian history kind of treated Jesus that way. You go back to the medieval age, and Jesus was someone who was good for the religious, good for women and children, and maybe like old, sick, poor men. But really, Jesus was unrealistic for the real movers and shakers in the world, which were men who owned land. So the question again is, who is smart? Who do you ask about succeeding in life? Better yet, whose life do you spend time looking at? We spend a lot of time looking at other people's lives via social media. And whose lives are we looking at, and why? Was Jesus just nice, or was he truly smart? Or another word for smart might be wise. So before I answer the question about Jesus, is he wise? What is wisdom? There's a text there from Proverbs. By wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding he set the heavens in place. By his knowledge the watery depths were divided, and the clouds let drop the dew. So the book of Proverbs describes wisdom in a lot of different ways, but a summary would go something like this. Wisdom is insight into the nature and reality, into the nature of life and reality. It's humility and how to follow that insight to a good and successful life. The wise life is characterized by humility before God. The scriptures say, fear God and hate evil. So it also involves rejecting immorality. Ultimately, wisdom is the set of principles upon which God established his world and he created. And I forgot the other thing here. Wise people are characterized by few words and even less bad temper. The New Testament claims that Jesus is the wisdom of God in action with skin on. First Corinthians 1:30 says that actually Jesus has become for us the wisdom of God. In John chapter 1, Jesus is described as the Logos, or the Word is what most of our translations say. But if you look closely, Logos has a very similar root, L-O-G, to another word in the English language, logic. Jesus is the logic of God, the logic of the universe. He's the basic foundation basic building block of the world, which sounds a lot like what wisdom is in Proverbs chapter 8. And in John 14:6, Jesus says about himself, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So why did people flock to Jesus to listen to him, besides the whole miraculous bread thing? And so it's important to remember what a disciple is, and that Jesus had more than 12 of them. We know of the 12 who were eventually designated apostles, but Jesus had a lot of disciples, probably hundreds of them, at least 70, because he sent out 70 disciples at one point to go spread the message about him while he was still before his crucifixion. A disciple is someone as a student or an apprentice, someone learning the manner of thought and life of the rabbi. So dozens or hundreds of people thought that Jesus's life was something that they wanted to emulate. And so they would leave what they were doing to go be with Jesus, to learn his way of seeing and being in the world. And honestly, even his opponents were impressed with Jesus. At one point, some people were sent to arrest him in John chapter 7, and they came back. And they're like, hey, where's Jesus? I'm like, oh, we didn't arrest him because it says, no one ever spoke the way this man does. So Jesus wasn't some wild-eyed idealist. He was the realist of the real. Dallas Willard, in his book called The Divine Conspiracy, has this to say about Jesus, and I think it's just really cool, so I'm going to read it. About Jesus, he is not just nice, he is brilliant. He is the smartest man who ever lived. He is now supervising the entire course of world history while simultaneously preparing the rest of the universe for our future role in it. He always has the best information on everything, and certainly on the things that matter most in life. So what does it mean then if Jesus truly is the wisdom of God, the most brilliant mind to ever walk and talk on planet Earth? I think one thing it means is we might need to stop arguing with Jesus. And he said some pretty intense things. Just a little sampling. He tells us that real life does not consist in things or wealth or prestige. We might be tempted to argue with him. This is what he says in Matthew 6. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? They also tell us, do not worry, which I love bringing up this passage as we head into finals. It's like my favorite thing to do heading to final season. Do not worry, Jesus says. What shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear, or how am I going to pass my classes? For the pagans, who are the people who do not know God, run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Wow. You're never going to listen to Jesus on these issues if you don't believe he's actually brilliant. And if you do believe he is the wisdom of God, then we can actually begin building a life on him. Not just having religious thoughts about him, but building a life on him. His revelation of the Father's care for us, his gift of life in the kingdom, and obey his teachings. At the end of his Sermon on the Mount, before everyone was like, oh my gosh, he's the best teacher ever, Jesus summarizes his message in this way. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Where are you looking? Whose life are you looking at? Who do you want to emulate? What and who are you listening to in your quest to build a life? Jesus is the wisdom of God. His kingdom is real, and we can live in the reality of that kingdom. We're not going to enter into that reality by praying nice prayers or singing nice songs or attending church in Chi Alpha. We enter only as we humbly listen and obey to the life he taught.